Hi, and welcome to our Parsha class this year, Parsha Beha'alot'cha 5784. There is a lot to talk about in the Parsha, and so without any further ado, I think we'll just give a quick summary. Like I said, there's a lot of topics. I believe it was the Rav Soloveitchik of YU fame who said in one of his Parsha classes on Beha'alot'cha, he said he feels sometimes in this Parsha he feels like a bee flying around different flowers, picking at different kinds of nectar, and that's kind of how it feels. It's just so many different topics. I mean, it starts with the mitzvah to light the menorah that Aaron and the Kohanim had. It continues with the beginning of the march of the Jewish people into the midbar. It was their first um, actual journey together, following all the rules we had laid down in the last few parshot of how the how the how the tribes would be arranged and how they would travel and who would go first and all of that. All of that is finally enacted in this week's parsha. The Jewish people have there's the incident with probably the father-in-law of Moshe, who Chovav, who asks, or Yitro, which according to Rashi is the same person, so who seems to almost go with the Jewish people and then decides not to, seemingly, unless he's convinced otherwise, according to some opinions. It's just a very strange incident to begin with. There's more in the parsha. There's the complaints of the Jewish people, and there's the two upside down nuns in the parsha that have in it the Heben So Aaron, the songs that were sung when the Aaron would be on the move or when it would stop. And there's quite a bit to say on all of that. And like I said, the Jewish people complaining and receiving meat, too much meat, and all kinds of interesting stories in the parsha. I think it would behoove us to get started on the actual sources and see what we can learn from our sages of the past. Let's see what we can find here. All right, let's start with the source sheet. We're going to look at the first three verses in chapter 9. Chapter 9 is already the third aliyah. So if you want some Torah on the first two aliyot, you'll have the third aliyah begins with the command to Moshe to give the Korban Pesach. And this, of course, leads into the whole idea of this week's parsha, the famous idea of the Pesach, people who were tamei, who were impure, or people who were too far away from the Mishkan, or in the case of the Beit Hamikdash, would be allowed to bring their Korban Pesach 1 month later. No harm, no foul, and literally no foul, because it had to be a Korban Pesach, which is a sheep. Anyway,
Wait, I'm
so
sorry. Fowl? Fowl is a sheep?
no, not foul. That's no harm, no foul, no foul. Fowl would
Oh,
be
because
for
I thought that was like a
fowl is
bird.
chicken, right?
Okay,
Bird or
cool. Thank
chicken,
you.
yeah, pheasant, turkey,
You got
not
me a
sheep.
little nervous there. I was like, oh
Yeah,
no.
that's why no foul. All right, V'daber. Uh, the verse begins with V'daber Shama Moshe midbar Sinai b'shana hashenit l'tzeitam me'eretz Mitzrayim b'chodesh harishon lemor. So it's a very, very long verse that basically says Hashem said to Moshe, commanded him at in the wilderness of Sinai, of the Sinai desert, which may or may not have been a desert at the time, in the second year to leave, that the second year after he left Mitzrayim, on the first month, which was Nisan. So he said to him, "V'yasu b'nei Yisrael et Pesach b'mo'ado." Make sure that the Jewish people bring their Korban Pesach in its time, b'mo'ado, in its time. which, and in case you don't know what that is, the third verse tells us, Ba'arba asar yom b'chodesh hazeh, and the 14th of this month, it's the first month, Nisan, bein harbaim, between the evenings, in other words, before the evening, tasu oto b'moado b'kol chukotav chol mishpatav tasu oto. So it has to be done in its correct time and with all of the proper strength and with all the rules and all the laws, and that's how it has to be done. The Ramban wants to point out that this verse is very, very important for a principle that is commonly known in the Torah, and especially the rabbinic law, and in the rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, and that's a concept known as "en mukdam u'uchar b'Torah." So he says, which means that there is no before and after in the Torah. In other words, the Torah is not in chronological order. A concept that Rashi uses, and according to the Ramban, overuses in his interpretation of many verses. So his famous explanation of how it should be used and how it should be not used is right here, what we're going to look at. Mikan Amru Chachamim. From here, the rabbi said, Zichrono Livrach, Ein Mukdam Muchar Bator. There's no before and after in the Torah. There's no before, there's no later in the Torah. In other words, there's no chronological order. Vatam ha'ichur hazeh haya. And the reason for this for this particular command that Hashem is commanding now Moshe at this point to give the Korban Pesach, which is what we're talking about, is ki kasher ba hasefer zeh haravi v'yizker hamitzvot shenit tavu Yisrael midbar Sinai lishatam. Since the book, this book we've been learning about midbar has mentioned the commandments that the Jewish people had in the midbar. All of those rules, all the things we talked about earlier in the Parshot, in Parshat Bamidbar, in Parshat Naso, all of those things had to be sort of dealt with before we got to the actual story that we're going to start with now. V'hiskir tchila had the galim. First, it mentions the galim, the ways that the camps were set up. Umakom ha'ohel ma'amad misharetav, and where the Mishkan was, and the people who were transporting it and dealing with it. In other words, the Levium, v'tikun hamishmarot, the lamas l'chol avodat or moed, and who was supposed to do what in all of the travels of the Ol Moed, again of the Mishkan. V'hiskir karbonot hanisim haviyu hagalot asher yasu oto bahen kol et hayotan b'midbar. And then the Torah had to tell us about all the karbonot that the nisim that the princes brought. That's the end of Parshat Naso, right? All in preparation for the Mishkan to be used. And then Hashlim Karbonotam Hanukkah Mizbeach. Then it concludes with how the Hanukkah Mizbeach was done. In other words, with the offerings that were done at the dedication of the altar. Shehu Ma'achad Nisan Be'echad Nisan O Kodam Lachen. That which had to happen. All of these started from the first day of Nisan, like that. And then only after that can the Torah go back to telling us the history of what happened. In other words, now the Torah can go back to the point where Hashem commanded the Jewish people to bring the Korban Pesach in the second year after leaving Mitzrayim. In other words, this is the second Pesach, by the way. Right, the first Pesach, assuming that was the first Pesach, was in Mitzrayim. I say assuming because you've probably heard me say in the past that there's an idea that the spirit of Pesach was always there, the spirit of Geula, of freedom, which is why even all the way back in the time of Abraham, before the Korban Pesach, before the Pesach story even happened, Abraham and Lot were feeding their guests matzah during Pesach, right? So because there's that spiritual power in that season, as it says in Sefer Yetzirah. But that was the first like holiday of Pesach was in Mitzrayim, and this is now the second year. This is the year after that, right? And that's what we're talking about in this verse where Hashem is commanding the Jewish people to do this. Be'al dat Rabbeinu lo nahag midbar ele b'shana zo bilvad. And this Korban Pesach was only done, according to the rabbis, was only done this year. And the second Pesach was the only other Pesach celebrated until the Jews got to Israel. Why? The Jewish people did not give a circumcision to their children in the midbar. They were traveling. It's considered unsafe to give a brit milah to a child when while traveling, and therefore and then they were, because they didn't have the brit milah, not their children, not their slaves. Therefore, they couldn't really eat from the Korban Pesach, and so they didn't bring the Korban Pesach. They didn't have Pesach. They didn't celebrate Pesach the whole time that they were in the midbar. And so,
sorry, the whole 40 years, or we're just talking until?
Yes, all 38 years until they got to Israel. Right? Could be that Hashem commanding this mitzvah was necessary here. Why? Be'eretz, in other words, Eretz Yisrael. So, because the Jews were commanded to bring the Korban Pesach for future generations, when did that happen? That command, Pesach Dorot, that command was only applicable for Israel. In other words, Hashem never wanted the Jews to bring the Korban Pesach in the midbar. The whole idea of, and it says it over and over again, where it talks about you could look back in Shemot, Yud Bet Pasuk Lamed Gimel, so 1243, Mem Gimel, sorry. 1243, where it says over there, again, it's in the Ramban, is very clear that the Jewish people were not commanded even to bring the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim, in the midbar. That mitzvah only began in Eretz Yisrael. It happens to be, he says elsewhere, all mitzvot are really meant for Eretz Yisrael. And so there's a whole question of how he feels about mitzvot done outside of Israel, whether they work, whether they're just for practice, etc.
Where did he live again?
He died in Eretz Yisrael. He finally moved there, but he started out in Spain.
Okay.
Right. The Ktiv, as it says in the verse, when you go to the land, that's where you're going to do this. Right? That's in Yud Bet Kaf Hey, 1225. And it says over there also, Hashem El Eretz Haknani et ha'avoda hazot. When you go to the land of Canaan, that's when you're going to do this service. Right now, he doesn't want, he doesn't command you hold on. Hashem does want you to do this in the midbar as well. Today, shetiyeh zecher gulatam v'hanisim shenasu lahem lavoteinu lavotehem v'nekad lahem min ha'avot ha'roim livneihem, so that you won't forget. So that children will be able to pass on. Parents will be able to pass on to children, and those children will be able to pass on to their children the memory of this thing. If you have a huge gap, people won't even know that this existed, right? Especially these are the people who saw this happen, right? They actually witnessed it. From the children and the children's children and the children for every generation. Right, so there's that other concept. And that's why it says in the beginning, it's going to be when you come to the land. That it's not meant. The mitzvah is not meant. He will say this about any mitzvah, really, but this mitzvah in particular is not meant for outside of Israel for future generations. He wants the generations in Israel, right, where the Jewish people belong and should live, that they should have this idea of Pesach. midbar, and so he is adding here now that the Jewish people should keep this mitzvah at least this year, right? And so that's why our verse comes to teach us that the Jewish people needed to celebrate Pesach in the midbar as well. So again, the mitzvah is not meant for the midbar, but they're commanded to keep the mitzvah of Pesach in the midbar because they need to carry it on. Their children need to carry it on when they get to Eretz Yisrael. A little bit interesting. I don't know how he's going to deal with, but there's one problem with this. I don't know if you caught on to it yet. And the problem is that at this point, this is before they knew that they were going to be in the midbar for so long, right? They were supposed to, at this point, get up and go, and a few days later, they were going to be in Eretz Yisrael. It's only because they believed the report of the spies that was delayed for another 38 years. So it's a little bit roundabout here. I'm not sure how he deals with it, but that's a question for a later time. Maybe some of the commentaries deal with it. So again, this Korban Pesach that they're supposed to do is offered here in the midbar. They're not in Israel yet. So the expectation is that they're going to offer this every single year in the midbar. And of course, we just said that the rabbis say that did not happen. The Jewish people did not do the Korban Pesach when they were in the midbar. V'aldad Raboteinu, as we said, according to what the rabbi said, Lo asu oto ela shna zu bilvad shelo hayu yochlim la'asota. They only did it that particular year because that was the only time they really could do it. The Tishanol do lahem banim of avadim, because they didn't have circumcised children and slaves. V'lo yachlu lamul otam min hatam shehizkiru shaya lahem l'sakana. You're not really supposed to do a circumcision when you're moving around because of the dangers, as we said before. It says that the Gemara in Yevamot 71b on the bottom. All right. Anyway, Aval b'sifrei Amr, but it says in Sifrei something different. Another reason why they didn't do the Korban Pesach. The Pesach b'Rishon bignut Yisrael hakatuv midaber. The fact that they did this Korban Pesach is supposed to be to the detriment, the disgrace of the Jewish people. Shelo asu ela Pesach zeh bilvad. They only did that particular Korban Pesach, only that in the second year. V'chein hu omer hazvachim u'mincha v'gashtem li b'midbar arbaim shana. So quoting the verse in Amos 5:25. He says, did you bring me sacrifices for 40 years in the wilderness? Did you even bring me the Korban Pesach? No, you didn't. So it's clearly, according to the Midrash and quoting this book in Nach, it seems that the Jewish people are being castigated. They're being criticized for not doing this Korban Pesach. which is weird because if they did it for a good reason, right? Because of sakana, because of danger. So what did they do wrong? They weren't supposed to do a korban pesach. So now he has to. Now he has to explain this sifrei, this midrash. Darshu kain mina pasuk hazeh amar yashu at the pesach harishon be'arba asar yom lechodesh ben arbaim b'midbar Sinai. The rabbis are learning out from this. Yeah. The rabbis learning out from this that they made the Korban Pesach in the first month on the 14th day of the month in the afternoon in the midbar Sinai. That's all in the Torah. Kihu mikra yater, because that seems like an extra verse, so it has to teach something else. Because we said that already in what we read before from verses 1 through 3. He died, but Moshe Omer Yasu at Pesach b'chol asher tzivah Hashem at Moshe. It's enough to say that they did everything that Hashem commanded Moshe, which we already said. Aval hiskir hayom v'hamidbar l'romesh shelo asu oto midbar rak bayom hazeh. It's hinting to the fact that they only did it on that day and not any other time. V'hu gdutan, and that's that disgrace that the midrash is talking about. V'itachen shehagnut hazeh hu kalkalatam b'inyan hamaraglim. Now, could be he's saying maybe there's another disgrace that this could be referring to. Maybe this is the disgrace of the Jewish people that they listen to the spies. Shemimane nadu shayu nizufim, because of this Hashem was upset with them. Velo nishva lahem ruach tzfonit velo malu. The northern wind didn't blow, and they didn't, and that's why they didn't do the circumcision of their children and the slaves, because that northern wind would have made it healthy enough for them to do these circumcisions. So it's not that there was a natural sakana that they didn't circumcise their children. It's because of their behavior that they weren't able to circumcise their children. That's what they did wrong. They listened to the Meraglim, they didn't get the northern wind, and that's why they couldn't circumcise their children, and that's why they didn't do the Korban Pesach. So it's not like they didn't do the Korban Pesach because, well, it's bad weather, we can't do it. It's not. That's not the problem. It's bad weather. You can't do it because of you. You caused that. So so that's the genut. That's the disgrace of the Jewish people. He gives another explanation of what another opinion of what this disgrace was. We'll see he goes back to this first explanation in just a moment. Bevaraita hazu kedivrei haomer ein milad zecharim be'avadim ma'kevet bo. Maybe it could be that that shouldn't have prevented them anyway, and they were a little too, how do you want to say this, too particular about the sakana, and they didn't have to be so careful about it. They had permission to do it, and they didn't do it. They didn't do the circumcision. Nitatzlu v'lo asu oto. That's why by not doing it, hu genut gadol. That's a great disgrace. In other words, it often happens that people are, in all of their frumkeit, in all of their desire to be very, very religious, they focus on one particular thing and then ignore something maybe even bigger. So yes, there's an idea that you can't do circumcision for your children under certain conditions. Maybe they should have asked. Maybe the rabbis of the time, maybe Moshe, if they would have asked them, maybe he would have said something different. Then it was okay. And then then they basically ignored the mitzvah because they thought it was unhealthy. But like I said, he goes back to his original answer. He says, "Aval harishan hu yoter nachon me'enai." In my eyes, I like that. I like my first answer better. Ki hayam Moshe machricham la'asoto. It was Moshe who stopped them. That they did ask, and Moshe said, "Don't do it." V'lo hayam manicham l'chiyuv karet. And that, so if they're doing that, they're not deserving of any kind of punishment for ignoring the mitzvah of Brit Milah, which prevented them from doing the Korban Pesach. So now we have two answers to why the Jewish people needed to be commanded to give the Korban Pesach here. But there are other mitzvot of Pesach. It's not just that Korban Pesach isn't the whole mitzvah. They weren't told to eat matzah or maror or anything like that. So he says, "Aval chag hamatzot shiva v'hash batat chametz lo hutzrach lomar ne'agubo." They didn't have to be told about eating matzah for 7 days or the mitzvah to get rid of the chametz. Why? Shehen chovat haguf v'noheged b'chol makom, because those are regular obligations that apply everywhere, not just in Israel. And therefore, it just only had to say, as it said earlier, that this is a mitzvah for all generations. So, so there you have. Again, why this mitzvah is placed here, and really it's an interesting Ramban in particular, as I was saying earlier when we started, because again he says very often that Rashi uses this idea of there's no before and after in the Torah, and he says you can only use that when it's necessary. In other words, when the verse wouldn't make sense otherwise. In fact, not only that, more than that, he says only when the verse itself basically says that, which it does here, because this verse, like we said before, starts with that it's in the first month, and we know that earlier verses in Bamidbar were already in the future months of the second year. So that's that. We've spoken in previous years about the idea of that Rabbi Akiva mentions that the upside down nuns in this week's parsha block off these two verses we're about to see, and these two verses are a sefer in and of themselves. Now that the Torah is not the 5 books of Moses, the Torah is the 7 books of Moses. So again, we have Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, the first part of Bamidbar, all the way up to this verse, chapter 10, verse 35, and then chapter 10, verse 35, and chapter 10, verse 36 are a 6th book of the Torah, and then the rest of Bamidbar is the 5th book of the Torah. Then the rest of Bamidbar is the 5th book, 6th book of the Torah, and then Devarim is the 7th book of the Torah. That's how Rabbi Akiva understands this part. It's basically we should be doing we should do Chazak before we get to Vayhi ben So'aron. We don't. That's not our custom. Don't get all excited. But it's a curiosity. We don't really hold like Rabbi Akiva, but because he's Rabbi Akiva, we should definitely have some respect for his opinion and try to understand it as best we can. These verses are super famous, super popular, mostly because almost every modern Orthodox shul for sure sings these verses when we open the ark, when we take the Torah out, and when we put the Torah back in. Right? The first verse is Vayhi ben So'aron Vayomer Moshe Kuma Hashem V'yafutzu Oivecha V'yanusu Misanecha Mipanecha. Right? So that's when we're taking out the Torah. And then when we're putting the Torah back in, which by the way translates, let's use Safari's translation for just sort of simplicity's sake. Say when the ark was set when the ark was set out, in other words, when the Aaron was moving, Vayhi ben So'aron, Vayomer Moshe would say, what would he say? Kuma Hashem, advance, O Hashem, v'yafutzu oivecha, and scatter your enemies, v'yanusu misanecha, mipanecha, and make sure that all of your enemies run away from in front of you. So it's a war song, really, right? The ark is moving. Push away all the enemies. Make room and kill everybody who's evil. And it sounds like almost like a song that an army would sing, right? And then when we put back the Torah, we sing the last part, the next verse. Uvenucha yomar shuva Hashem rivivos alfe Yisrael, or whatever tune you want to use. Anyway, so that was one tune somebody likes to use here. So again, Venucha Yomar, from the word Menucha, right? When it rested, when the Aron rested, Vayomer Yomar, they would say Shuva, return, like Teshuva, return Hashem Rivavot Alpha Yisrael, return Hashem to the 10,000s of the families of Israel, to the huge number of Jews. Return what? So that's the question, really. What is it that we're expecting Hashem to return? The Ibn Ezra has an interesting idea that many of us may or may not know, and it's a beautiful idea, really. Shuva Hashem Amar Rabbi Yehuda Medakdek Rishon Ki Kol Shav Shetamo Megzerat Tshuva. Everybody should do Tshuva. Hu Pol Omed Velo Yatza Vinyan Hakal. It should go back to being light. Rak Imiyat Tamo V'Shalvo Umesheket Kamo B'Shuva V'Nachat Toshen Ken Shuva Hashem Ruvat Alpha Yisrael. Just as it's quiet and calm and normal and peaceful when war ends, that's the bracha we give people for when this battle ends. So again, it seems to be that according to the Ibn Ezra, this whole concept that we're talking about, this traveling Mishkan, this traveling Aron, is going to help us fight our battles. It's going to inspire us. We're going to be able to push away our enemies. We're going to be able to get to Israel. We're going to be able to do mitzvot. No one's going to be able to stop us. It's a wonderful thing. But when it stops, when you get to your point, when you get to your destination, when you're able to rest your Aron, you should have rest. No PTSD, no harm, no difficulties, no bad sleep, no guilt, no collateral damage. When war ends, the bracha is that if it's a war of Torah, the Torah that you have is going to give you the peace of mind that is lacking in so many soldiers around the world when they're not fighting for Hashem, even when they think they're fighting for Hashem. Only Torah can give us that kind of peace of mind. And that's why we say this when we do during the traveling of the Aron. The Aron travels, and we ask Hashem to scatter our enemies, make war easy, make it simple, make it like the enemy's going to just run away. We don't have to kill anybody. Isn't that great? That'd be the ideal war. You don't have to kill anybody. And then when the Aron rests, the best part of an ideal war, not only are you at peace, but you are at peace of mind, and you have nothing to be afraid of, nothing to haunt you, no bad memories like many soldiers have. That's what it means. Shuva Hashem. That's what Hashem is returning. He's not returning himself. He's always been there. He's returning peace of mind to these poor soldiers who've been through such a hell on earth in their battles. I thought that was a beautiful point from the Ibn Ezra. All right. I think yeah. Next piece. So we're going to skip to chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. This is the beginnings of the Jewish people complaining. Right? This is right after the ark is moving, right? Right after the upside down nuns. According to some opinions we've quoted before, Rashi included, the upside down nuns are to separate between three different times the Jewish people messed up, right? The Korban Pesach is one thing, then the complaining, etc. So we don't want to have three bad things in a row. Otherwise, it becomes what's called in halacha a chazaka. It becomes the status quo. Because what's expected of us is to mess up. We don't want that to happen. So that's why there's the upside down nuns, according to, like I said, some opinions. Anyway, so it continues, chapter 11, verse 1 through 3. Vehi ha'am mitonenim rab aznei Hashem. So, and it was that the people, let's call it mitonenim, complained very badly in the ears of Hashem. Vishma Hashem, and Hashem heard. Vichar apo, and he became very angry. Nitavar bam eish, Hashem tochal b'ktzei hamachane, and Hashem started burned with a fire, burned the from the outside of the camp. V'tzak am el Moshe, the nation then cried to Moshe. V'itpal Moshe el Hashem, and Moshe prayed to Hashem. V'tishka ha'esh, and that's when the fire was extinguished, quieted down. V'yikra Hashem ha'makom ha'hu Tavera, and that place was called Tavera. Why? Yivar avam eish Hashem, because the fire of Hashem burned against them there. All right. The word we translated as complained is the word mitonenim. Our problem is going to be, as we'll see shortly, that the word mitonenim is hard to translate. Many of the famous big commentaries have difficulty translating this word. So let's see this in action. So first, Rashi. I always start with Rashi. Rashi says mitonenim, complaining. Mitonenim eloshan alila. The word mitonenim is based on the shorish of onanim is alila, with an ayin. Big problem with this. I mean, there's literally no ayin and no lamed in this word at all. So you have to basically stretch the different rules of dikduk to say that the word onanim is from the word alila. And alila means to look for an excuse. As Safari translates it, pretext, right? Mavakshim alila heich lifrosh achrei hamakom. They were looking for a reason. They were looking for excuses to separate from Hashem. Hu Omar b'Shimshon. That's what it says in regarding Shimshon. Ki to'anahu mevakish. He looked for a to'ana, a pretext against the Plishtim. So, like I said, Rashi is not the only commentary. The Malbim brings two other commentaries. So first he quotes Rashi. Then he quotes Ramban, third line there. Ramban, Perush, Meloshon Tsar. It's a language of pain. The mitonenim were in pain. That's why they spoke. Kamo onen oni. Brings another verse. Rava, Perush, Me'inyan Avon. So that it has to do with sin. Kimoid Matai Yalin Bekirban Machshavot Onecha. And then it says the Malbim Mishaloshet HaPirushim Nimtzu B'Sifri. All three of these explanations aren't original to these three great commentaries. These three explanations are all clearly available in the Midrash, in the Sifri. Ushlosham Emet, and they're all true. In other words, looking for an excuse, being in pain, and sinning are all three the same thing. How? Because if it would have said just that they're looking for a pretext, it wouldn't have said mitonenim. It would have just said kimitanim. That's the more grammatical way of saying that they are looking for a pretext. So he continues, just to get to the bottom of this. Let me try to find a good place to get to this point here. So anyway, he goes through the other two explanations as well, pointing out how they by themselves would not mean just that that they're complaining. In other words, the whole point is they were looking for a reason to complain. That's true. They were in pain. That's true. They were trying to sin. That's true. And they're all the same thing. Give me one moment. I'm sorry. Oxygen is an important thing. So all of these things are true, right? And if you think about it in your own life, this is a very relevant point, what the Malbim is saying, because very often you'll maybe encounter somebody who's not fulfilling the mitzvot, and it looks like they're looking for an excuse. I don't believe that little thing, so I'm not going to keep anything. Really, that one little detail, you don't like a particular mitzvah, say it's mitzvah of tzniut or kosher or whatever it is, right? So whatever mitzvah is giving that person a problem, so you learn about it. You don't just you don't just say I throw it all away, but there's something else going on. There's some sort of internal pain. What's the pain? The pain is the difference, the dichotomy that we all have between our Yetzer Tov and our Yetzer Hara, our body and our soul. The soul wants us to do good, and our body wants to do whatever it wants to do for its own simple, short-term pleasures, right? And that's those two priorities don't always align very well with each other, and that's painful. That's right. I really, really want to eat a cheeseburger, whatever it is. Right? I really, really want to. It hurts not to. So I want to allay my pain. I want to calm down my body by ignoring my soul. And that causes pain too. So again, looking for an excuse, being in pain, and what's the third one? Sinning altogether. Right? That's what that's what all of this causes. That's what all of this leads to, is this desire to no longer be on the right path with Hashem. It becomes too difficult. So that's one of the important lessons of this week's parsha that you can find in this one word, mitonenim. So it's very deep what the Malbim is saying, and it can teach us a lot of lessons about how to not only work on ourselves, but how to also help others who might be struggling with a mitzvah or whatever. And all mitzvot, even the ones that a person struggles with, all mitzvot have a reason, and they all fit in to how our body and our soul become aligned. And if you're feeling any kind of difficulty between the two, it's because there's a very good chance that you don't understand the mitzvah correctly, or you're not performing the mitzvah correctly. And either way, that's something that can be worked on that would avoid the pain that your body and your soul are feeling. Okay, this is probably going to be the last piece for tonight. It's a little bit, it borders a little bit on sort of Kabbalistic principles. So we're not going to go into great depth about it. Well, maybe we'll do it. We'll do what we have to do to understand it, I hope. When the Jewish people are being threatened by Hashem, Moshe defends them as usual. And he says in chapter 11, verse 15, Yud Aleph Tet Vav, Im kacha at oseli, harageni na harog et im tzatichim be'inecha al ere bera'ati. Says to Hashem, if you do this with me, kill me instead. I'm praying, and let me not see any more of my evil. One moment. Let's see if this is. Let me see if this is what I wanted to say. 1 second. Right. So this is when just to be clear, this is specifically when Moshe felt like this is too much for him to carry, the Jewish people, and eventually Hashem commands him to pick 70 other elders who are also going to have some nevuah, and they're also going to be leaders, on sort of on par almost with Moshe. And this is after so many threats to destroy the Jews, and Moshe just feels incapable of all of these responsibilities. So Rashi says, "Im kacha et aseli." Kacha is feminine. Tashash kocho shel Moshe kinekeva. Moshe became physically weaker as like a woman. And by the way, we're not saying that a woman is weak, but in comparison, usually speaking, not always, usually speaking, the majority of men are physically stronger than the majority of women. It's a statistic. It's certainly true back then. Maybe nowadays it's becoming less and less true. I don't know, but it was certainly true then. As we see in depending on who's participating in women's sports. All right, enough said about that topic. But again, Moshe is basically comparing himself to a woman in that he became weaker. Sorry, not on the word kacha. At asali, you is feminine. So that was Rashi. The Kli Yakar has a famous, important comment on this Rashi. And the Kli Yakar was writing in the Middle Ages in Prague. He was a rabbi there a little bit before the Maharal, or a little bit after now. I'm getting confused. Either way, so he quotes Rashi. And he says, "V'rabim kasher ra'u kain." When many people see this commentary of Rashi, tamuhu al pirush zeh. They're very confused they're very surprised. They're astounded by this explanation of Rashi zeh. V'ki b'pnei shetashesh kocho shel Moshe kenekeva amar lashon al klapei mala. He's not talking about himself, saying you, at. Saying he's talking about Hashem, that Hashem is weaker, and he's calling Hashem like a woman. V'ani omer shelo kasha midi. This is not really such a big question. Lefi she'amru Rabbeinu Zocheinu L'bracha. like our rabbis tell us in Yalkut Shimoni on Hazinu, 945. שהצדיקים מוסיפים כוח בגבורה של מעלה. The tzaddikim are able to increase the strength, the gevura of Hashem. Happens to be what I said was earlier about how there's a slight sort of Kabbalistic idea going on here, and that's regarding the idea of gevura. Gevura is one of the sfirot, right? It's one of the ways that Hashem is understandable to us in this world. Is what the sfirot are. So it says that the righteous among us are able to increase our sense of Hashem's strength in this world. Shenemar, it says in midbar Yud Daled Yud Zayin 14:17, you have increased, or you have shown, you have made great Yigdal, right, from the word Gadol, Koach Hashem, the strength of Hashem. And likewise, or contrast to that, Harishayim, Matishim Kocho, they lower Hashem's strength, as it says in Devarim, Tzur Yoladcha Teshi. It says the rock that raised you has become weaker. You've ignored. So by ignoring Hashem, the evil people in the world make Hashem's strength weaker. Now this is mind-blowing. It sounds like the Kli Yakar is saying that we have some sort of effect on Hashem. Now that's almost impossible just to even think about, because Hashem can't be weaker, can't be stronger. Hashem is unchanging. That's one of our core beliefs. What's the Kli Yakar saying? How could this be? This is something to think about. And by the way, what we're going to say right now from the Kli Yakar in his conclusion is very much focused on by Rav Chaim Volozhner in Nefesh HaChaim. And the idea here is this. Bir ha'inyan hu shemitzad ha'fsakat ha'shefa al yedei ma'aseh harishayim nira ki'ilu yesh pashut koach kaviyachol. Because of the evil that evil people do, it seems from our perspective like the flow of God's strength is constricted in this world. Not that it is. Hashem is, like we said, unchanging, but how we perceive him can change. The sun doesn't change how bright it is based on how much we open or close our eyes. Or if we shade our eyes, the sun didn't become weaker. We did something. We constricted, we stopped that shefa. We stopped that flow. And evil people do that. They stop the flow of goodness into this world. That's why this world can seem very terrible sometimes. Not because Hashem is terrible, God forbid. Not because the world is terrible, but because these evil people are making it seem that way. That is also the strength of tzaddikim, is the opposite strength. They have the ability to make Hashem seem great in this world. You see a tzaddik, you learn about a tzaddik's life, you're like, oh my gosh, God is so good, God is amazing, the world is an amazing place. Look at all these tzaddikim everywhere. Look how great they are. Look what a potential a human being has. And a human being is a nothing compared to Hashem. And look at how much we can do, how much kindness we have, how much Torah we can learn. All of that, and then we have the ability then to compare and say, look, if that's true for this individual, for this person, for this one rabbi, for this one Rosh Kollel to be such an amazing person, how much more so is Hashem great and awesome beyond our wildest imagination? And that's what it means. That's why Hashem, when Hashem brought about these events that Moshe feels that Hashem is weaker, it's not because Hashem is weaker, it's because these Rishayim, these evil people, have constricted the flow of Hashem's goodness into the world and therefore the world seems like a less enjoyable place to be. Of course, we learning a parsha like this, we I think can gain an opportunity to focus, to try to change that sort of cycle, to make sure that we realize what our potential is, what we're able to do. And like the Ramban said, our banim and bnei banim l'doro to doro, for generations and generations, will learn from us, and we'll be able to continue in the right path and bring more shefa of Hashem's gevura into this world. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now after I stop the live feed to Facebook.